Marcus Williams had once stood tall in his Army blues, a figure of unwavering strength and discipline. Now at 65, he drifted almost unseen through the weary veins of Cedar Falls, Wisconsin, a town whose soul seemed to have cracked alongside its boarded-up storefronts and rusting factories. Each morning, Marcus would sling his battered duffel bag over one shoulder and shuffle through the back alleys and forgotten streets. The bag seams were frayed, much like Marcus himself. Ever since the day Sarah, his wife, his anchor, lost her battle with a sudden heart attack, a battle that might have been won had the VA hospital not delayed her treatment for hours. He had sat helplessly by her side, watching the light drain from her with each passing minute. When the end finally came, Marcus sold their modest brick house on Elm Street, gathered the proceeds, and true to Sarah's final wishes, donated it all to the local children's hospital she had volunteered at for decades. Afterward, he simply disappeared, not into the earth, but into a different kind of invisibility, the kind reserved for the brokenhearted and the forgotten. Some battles end with medals. Marcus once murmured to a kindly church volunteer who had offered him a cup of coffee one snowy morning. Others end with silence. Marcus never begged. He refused to surrender the last piece of dignity he had. Instead, he survived by collecting aluminum cans, scrapping for change, and living off leftover kindness from a few places like Betty's Diner, where the waitresses slipped him coffee and the occasional sandwich without fuss. Most people, however, chose to cross the street rather than see him. As December's bitter cold settled into Cedar Falls bones, Marcus grew weaker. His coat, a relic from better days, was threadbare. His boots leaked snow melt. Hunger gnawed at him with feral persistence. By the third day, without a real meal, his hands were shaking so badly he struggled even to lift them. That afternoon, desperate and dizzy, Marcus stumbled into Murphy's Market, a squat building with a sagging awning and a cracked open sign. It smelled of old produce and cleaner, but to Marcus it was an oasis. He lingered near the produce section, eyeing a bin of bruised apples and day-old sandwiches piled haphazardly in a crate marked 50% off. His stomach twisted painfully. No one was watching. Murphy, the owner, was busy helping an elderly woman at the register. The single teenage stock boy was stacking cans at the far end of the store. Marcus hesitated, the moral weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders, but the hunger was stronger. With trembling fingers, he slipped a wrapped sandwich into the inside pocket of his jacket, then a small carton of milk. His hands were so cold, he could barely fasten the coat over them. He made his way toward the door, head bowed low, when a voice barked out, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Marcus froze. Murphy, his face purple with anger, marched toward him. Marcus stammered, but it didn't matter. Murphy had already reached for the phone, stabbing at the keys. "Police now," Murphy growled. "We don't tolerate thieves around here." Marcus didn't resist. He simply stood there hollow-eyed and exhausted, his meager prize still tucked under his coat. Within minutes, a squad car pulled up. The fluorescent lights flickered harshly as two officers entered. Detective Rodriguez, a burly man with a buzz cut, and Officer Martinez, whose keen brown eyes immediately spotted the dog tags peeking from beneath Marcus's collar. "You served?" she asked quietly as Rodriguez spoke loudly into his radio. Marcus managed a small nod. Long time ago when it mattered. Officer Martinez hesitated just for a moment, but procedure was procedure. And so, before the scattered evening shoppers of Cedar Falls, Marcus Williams was handcuffed and escorted from Murphy's Market, his dignity stripped away like an old tattered coat. Outside, some people stared. Others looked away uncomfortable. No one stepped forward. No one asked if there was more to the story. The mugshot captured not just Marcus's face, but the deep lines etched there. Not just by age, but by sorrow, loneliness, and a country that had once saluted him, but now barely acknowledged him. That night, as he sat in the municipal holding cell, Marcus carefully drew out a small, tattered photograph from inside his shirt. Sarah's face smiled up at him, soft, bright, and forever young. He whispered into the cold, empty room, "I'm trying, love. I'm trying." Outside the barred window, the winter wind howled, and somewhere beyond that, destiny stirred. Morning in the Cedar Falls Municipal Court was a gray mechanical thing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering now and then as the worn floor tiles echoed with the shuffled steps of the weary, the desperate, and the defeated. Marcus Williams shuffled in with the others, his boots scraping tiredly along the floor. The same tattered jacket hung from his bony shoulders, the fabric now stiff from last night's damp cold. His wrists ached from the cuffs, though the officers had not been unkind. It wasn't cruelty that bruised him. It was indifference. No family waited for him on the cracked wooden benches. No friends whispered encouragement from the gallery. Just Marcus hunched small at the defendant's table, his duffel bag tucked between his scuffed boots, as if it might still protect something precious inside. The clerk, a young woman with harried eyes and a bored tone, droned through the morning's docket. Case 19 to 842. The State versus Marcus Williams. Marcus stood when his name was called, swaying slightly. His knees felt like brittle sticks. He could feel the quiet murmurs ripple through the courtroom. A few curious glances landed on him, then slid away, some with mild disgust, others with empty pity. At the prosecutor's table stood a young man named Alan Pierce, crisp in his blue suit, a fresh bar exam certificate still metaphorically clinging to his lapel. Pierce spoke briskly as if Marcus were an item to be moved along the morning's conveyor belt. "Your Honor," Pierce began, "the defendant was apprehended while committing a petty theft at Murphy's Market. Surveillance footage confirms the theft. The defendant has no fixed address, no employment, prior minor citations for loitering and public intoxication. The state recommends remand until trial to prevent further offenses." Judge Patricia Coleman, a stern figure with silver hair and wire-framed glasses, barely glanced at Marcus at first. Her fingers tapped against the stack of arrest reports on her bench. Moving from case to case with rote efficiency, she flipped open Marcus's file, expecting to find the same parade of sadness she saw daily when something slipped loose between the papers. It was a worn, scratched military dog tag attached to a thin chain. It clattered quietly onto the judge's bench. Coleman stilled. She leaned forward and for the first time looked directly at Marcus. Really looked. The name stamped into the metal caught her breath. Williams Marcus J., blood type O+. Something deep in Coleman's chest stirred. A memory she hadn't called on in years. Muddy boots, gunfire cracking the air, the burning stench of diesel and blood. "Request a 5-minute recess," Judge Coleman said abruptly, interrupting the prosecutor mid-sentence. The clerk blinked, startled. Pierce hesitated, confused. Coleman didn't wait for approval. She rapped her gavel once, sharp and final. "Recess granted." Counsel approach. She ordered, rising from her bench and disappearing into her chambers. Marcus stood there dazed. Around him, the courtroom buzzed with quiet confusion. No one had ever stopped the march of procedure for him before. No one had ever interrupted a system already moving to swallow him whole. He sat slowly, not daring to hope, not daring to think too far ahead. Meanwhile, behind the heavy oak doors of her chambers, Judge Coleman stood staring down at the dog tag she held in her palm. Marcus Williams. She closed her eyes and let the years roll back. Afghanistan, 2006. The second battle, the ambush. She could still feel the searing heat of the blast that had torn through their convoy. Could still hear the ragged screams of soldiers pinned under twisted metal. She could still remember the moment when a figure had hauled her bodily out of a burning Humvee, ignoring flying bullets, ignoring his own wounds. It had been Marcus Williams, a man who had bled and fought and saved others without thought of reward. Now sitting in an orange jumpsuit over a sandwich and a carton of milk. Judge Coleman sat heavily in her chair, the file still open in front of her, the entries stabbed at her heart. Discharged honorably. 3 tours overseas. Bronze Star recipient. Termination of VA benefits. Reason no known address. The next line was the most damning of all. Case closed. Closed. As if a man's life could simply be filed away and forgotten because he had no mailing address. Coleman ran a trembling hand through her hair. "God forgive us," she whispered. She knew in that moment that the law, the cold, indifferent law, had abandoned Marcus long before this petty theft ever happened. Marcus hunched further into his seat, feeling the hostile air pressing down on him. A young woman in the gallery, maybe a law student, maybe a reporter, watched him with wide, curious eyes, but no one spoke. No one approached. The minutes stretched painfully. At last, the heavy doors opened, and Judge Coleman emerged, but something about her had changed. Gone was the detached professionalism. Instead, she walked slowly, deliberately, her face set with a gravity that hushed even the whispered side conversations. She took her seat and looked straight at Marcus again. "Williams," she said, voice low but firm, "before this court proceeds, I am ordering an immediate review of your military records and VA status. This case will be stayed until further notice." The prosecutor sputtered an objection, but Coleman silenced him with a raised hand. Furthermore, the judge continued, "This court is requesting assistance from the Veterans Legal Defense Network to provide Mr. Williams with pro bono representation effective immediately." Gasps fluttered through the courtroom. Marcus blinked, not understanding. Coleman leaned forward slightly, her voice softening just a fraction. "You are not invisible here, Staff Sergeant." The title hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Marcus bowed his head, hiding the sudden sting in his eyes. Outside the courthouse windows, snow began to fall. Slow, quiet, and pure. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something he had nearly forgotten. Not hope, but the memory of it. And sometimes that was enough to start. That night, in the silence of his tiny cell, Marcus Williams sat on a narrow bunk, staring at the stained ceiling. He cradled the photograph of Sarah in his rough hands. Her smile, still radiant after all these years, warming the chilled corners of his heart. "If you're lost, Marcus," her voice echoed from some soft, worn place inside him. "It's not forever. I'll wait for you." The words had been her comfort to him during his darkest deployments. Now, in the sterile loneliness of Cedar Falls Jail, they were all he had left. The guards treated him politely enough, but with that clinical distance reserved for the broken and forgotten. He ate a small tray of watery stew and a stale roll, but most of it remained untouched. Hunger no longer gnawed at him. It had been replaced by a colder emptiness. In the adjoining cell, a younger inmate, all bravado and bitterness, sneered as Marcus shifted painfully on his bunk. "Another old-timer, thinking the world owes him." The boy muttered loud enough for Marcus to hear. "But you made up all the more stories, too." "Yeah, right?" When Marcus didn't respond, the kid pushed harder, giving Marcus a rough shove as he walked past to the sink. Marcus stumbled against the metal bunk, catching himself on the frame. Still, he said nothing. No rage, no retaliation, just a quiet endurance honed over too many years of fighting battles no one ever saw. Back in his seat, Marcus let the anger roll over him and away. He simply pressed Sarah's picture to his chest, whispering so softly it was almost prayer. "Just holding on, darling. Just holding on." Across town, in her dimly lit chambers, Judge Patricia Coleman bent over stacks of documents and old military files. A pot of burnt coffee sat untouched beside her. She had pulled Marcus's military service record, and the more she read, the more a knot of shame twisted tighter inside her gut. Marcus's file was a tapestry of sacrifice. Bronze Star for Valor, 2005, for shielding wounded comrades during a mortar attack. 2 Purple Hearts awarded for injuries sustained saving civilians during a street ambush. Combat Action Ribbon for direct engagement under enemy fire. And there among the commendations were mentions of Marcus's acts of humanity, too. Letters from fellow soldiers and even Afghan civilians describing a man who had not just fought wars, but carried wounded children, shared scarce food with strangers, taught young soldiers to read and write in the dusty evenings between patrols. A true shepherd in the worst of storms. Coleman leaned back heavily, covering her face with her hands. How had they let him slip through the cracks? The answer was simple. They hadn't slipped. They had shoved him. When Marcus returned from his final deployment in 2007, Sarah had been waiting. But the PTSD, unacknowledged and untreated, had eaten at him like rust. When Sarah fell sick, he had tried to fight for her, tried to navigate the VA's impossible bureaucracy. But a missed appointment here, a lost piece of paperwork there, and their small, fragile life had crumbled. By 2009, with Sarah gone, Marcus had no address to anchor him. No address, no benefits, no survival, forgotten by the nation he had fought for. Until now, Coleman closed the file and reached for the phone. The next morning, Marcus sat shackled in the transport van, bumping along the icy streets back to the courthouse. He didn't expect anything different. More hearings, more polite apologies masked as legal procedures, more slow erosion. The bailiff unshackled him outside courtroom 3. Straight inside, "Sergeant," the bailiff said softly. "Sergeant." The word struck Marcus like a sudden hand to the chest. Inside, the atmosphere was different. The courtroom was full, not with angry citizens or bored lawyers, but with soldiers. 3 Army officers stood at attention at the back of the courtroom, dressed in immaculate dress blues, the sharp creases in their trousers as crisp as razors. Behind them, a crowd of men and women in civilian clothes, some in old, proud veteran ball caps, others holding small American flags folded neatly against their chests. Marcus stopped short, overwhelmed. At his defense table sat a sharply dressed woman, a leather briefcase beside her chair. She rose when she saw him. "Staff Sergeant Williams," she said, her voice calm but strong. "My name is Rebecca Monroe, Veterans Legal Defense Network. I'm here to represent you." Marcus blinked, stunned. "I don't have money for a lawyer." "You don't need it," she said with a small, fierce smile. "You have the truth." At the bench, Judge Coleman adjusted her glasses and nodded at Marcus. "Williams," she said, voice clear and steady. "This court has been made aware of extraordinary circumstances regarding your history and service." The prosecutor, looking deeply uncomfortable, didn't even try to interrupt. Coleman continued, "We will be hearing critical testimony today on your behalf, and the court will act accordingly." Rebecca placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's arm as Colonel Eric Dunham, one of the officers, took the stand. In measured, precise terms, Colonel Dunham detailed Marcus's valor, his sacrifices, his unwavering loyalty to his fellow soldiers and to civilians alike. He presented hard evidence that Marcus's VA pension had been wrongfully terminated, robbing him not only of financial security, but of the vital mental health care he so desperately needed. "The injustice inflicted upon this man," Colonel Dunham finished, "is not merely a clerical error. It is a moral failure, and it demands correction." The words rang in the courtroom's heavy silence. Judge Coleman's voice broke slightly as she spoke. "This court recognizes Staff Sergeant Marcus Williams not as a vagrant or criminal, but as a decorated hero whose dignity we collectively failed to honor." She turned to the prosecutor. "Do you have anything further?" The young man, eyes glistening, shook his head. "The state moves to dismiss all charges. With prejudice." The gavel fell once, twice, sealing the words into official record. "Dismissed." Marcus stood there uncertain as the room erupted, not into applause, but into something deeper. The quiet rustling of people rising to their feet, hands pressed respectfully over hearts, heads bowed. The Army officers saluted him, not as a pitying gesture, but as one warrior to another. For the first time in almost 2 decades, Marcus Williams stood tall, unbroken, and seen. Marcus stood motionless as the courtroom rose to its feet around him. The moment stretched, suspended in a silence so profound it hummed in his ears. He wasn't sure how long he stood there, feeling the warmth of so many unseen hands lifting the crushing weight he had carried for years. Slowly, shakily, Marcus lifted his hand and returned the Army officer's salute. His palm trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the unbearable flood of emotion surging through a heart that had all but forgotten how to hope. The bailiff approached respectfully, no longer a guard, but a silent witness to something sacred. "Sergeant Williams," the bailiff said softly, You're free to go, sir. Sir. Marcus's throat tightened painfully at the sound as he stepped away from the defendant's table. The gallery parted like a tide. Veterans, soldiers, strangers, all making room, all acknowledging something that had been invisible for too long. Near the courtroom door, a small commotion stirred. A young woman with tear-bright eyes and trembling hands rushed forward, pushing through the gathered crowd. "Uncle Marcus," she cried. Marcus turned, bewildered. It had been years since anyone called him that. The young woman threw her arms around him before he could even react, clutching him fiercely. For a moment, Marcus stood stiff, stunned by the human contact. Then his arms slowly, almost fearfully, came up to hold her. "It's me, Lisa, Sarah's niece." Marcus pulled back to study her face. It was there, the trace of Sarah's laughter in the corners of her mouth. The same stubborn spark in her brown eyes. "I found you," she whispered, voice breaking. "I've been looking for you since Aunt Sarah passed. You just disappeared." Marcus could barely breathe. "I thought there was nothing left," he rasped. "You're not alone," Lisa said fiercely. "Not anymore." Reporters snapped photos as the unlikely reunion unfolded. But no one intruded. Even they seemed to understand that this was sacred ground. Outside the courthouse, the biting wind carried the scent of fresh snow and something sharper, the sharp, clean air of change. On the steps, Judge Coleman approached Marcus quietly. Her robe gathered around her like a soldier's battered cloak. "You saved my life once, Staff Sergeant," she said, offering her hand. Marcus shook it, the two soldiers gripping each other's arms like brothers in a forgotten war. "And now," Coleman added, her voice thick with emotion, "I intend to help you reclaim yours." True to her word, within days, Coleman personally oversaw the filing of a petition to reinstate Marcus's full veterans benefits. Retroactively, Veterans Legal Defense worked alongside her, moving mountains that once seemed immovable. The VA, faced with overwhelming evidence and public pressure after Marcus's story hit the national news, issued a formal apology, the first of its kind, acknowledging the grievous mishandling of Marcus's case. A check for nearly $312,000 in back pay was delivered by hand. But more importantly, Marcus was enrolled in a specialized veterans housing program, offered comprehensive medical care, and introduced to a community of fellow veterans who welcomed him without judgment. 1 month later, Cedar Falls held a ceremony at City Hall. They called it a celebration of honor, but it was more than that. Banners lined the streets, children waved small flags, and old veterans dusted off their uniforms. Businesses donated food, musicians played in the square, and the air buzzed with a reverence usually reserved for forgotten holidays. When Marcus stepped onto the stage, wearing a new, neatly pressed coat over his army dress blues, his medals gleaming, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation that rolled like thunder through the town. Judge Coleman presented him with a plaque inscribed with simple but searing words. "For service, sacrifice, and unseen valor, Cedar Falls remembers." Marcus cleared his throat, clutching the podium with both hands. He wasn't used to speaking anymore, especially not to so many faces turned toward him, waiting not for apology, but for his voice. "I didn't save lives for medals," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I didn't fight for thanks. I fought because a soldier doesn't leave others behind." He paused, the sea of faces blurring slightly as emotion rose. "But when you come home," he said, "you hope maybe that someone will come back for you too." A hush fell. "And you did," he whispered. The crowd seemed to breathe as one, 1,000 hearts breaking and mending in the same moment. After the ceremony, as twilight painted the town in gold and lavender, Marcus sat quietly on a bench in the park, the same bench where he had once eaten scraps with only the winter wind for company. Beside him sat Lisa, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. Rocky, a service dog donated by a Veterans Foundation, dozed at Marcus's feet, a loyal companion for the new chapters ahead. Children played nearby, their laughter ringing like bells. The flag above City Hall fluttered in the gentle breeze, casting shifting shadows across Marcus's face. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out Sarah's photograph. "Found my way back," Love, he whispered, tracing her smile with his thumb. Just like you said I would. Above him, the first star of the evening blinked into existence, and Marcus Williams, invisible no longer, smiled into the coming night, knowing that even the longest winters end, and even the most forgotten heroes can find their way home. The transformation was complete. From invisible vagrant to honored veteran, from forgotten casualty to living testament that dignity, once lost, could be restored by those willing to see beyond the surface to the soul beneath. 6 months later, the elevator dinged at the Cedar Falls Veterans Center, and Marcus Williams stepped out in his crisp volunteer coordinator uniform. His name tag read simply Marcus Williams, Peer Support Specialist. The building that had once seemed impossibly out of reach now felt like home. His office, once a converted supply room, now had a window overlooking the park where he used to sleep on benches. A steady flow of visitors filled his days, veterans seeking guidance, social workers needing resources, judges requesting expert testimony on veteran cases. The phone rang constantly with requests for his insight on homelessness, PTSD, and the gaps in the system that swallowed heroes whole. Judge Coleman had kept her word beyond anyone's imagination. Marcus now served as a consultant to the state judiciary, helping design protocols to identify veterans in the legal system before they fell through the cracks. The Marcus Williams Act, signed into law just 3 months prior, mandated veteran identification and specialized support in all Wisconsin courts. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after his arrest at Murphy's Market, Marcus walked through downtown Cedar Falls. Store owners waved from their doorways. Children smiled and called out greetings. The same streets that had once been his hunting ground for aluminum cans now welcomed him as a neighbor and protector. At Murphy's Market, the owner himself approached with a handshake and genuine warmth. "We've got your usual coffee ready, Marcus. And there's a sandwich in the back if you're hungry." The irony wasn't lost on either man. The same store where Marcus had been arrested now provided him free meals, not from pity, but from respect. That afternoon, Marcus sat in his office counseling a young veteran struggling with addiction and homelessness. The kid's eyes held the same hollow look Marcus had carried for years. As Marcus shared his story, he watched something shift in the young man's face, hope replacing despair. "You made it back," the veteran whispered. "We both will," Marcus replied, pressing Sarah's photograph gently against his chest. "Some battles end with medals. Others end with someone coming home." Outside, the flag flew high above Cedar Falls, and Marcus Williams, once forgotten, now stood as living proof that redemption was always possible.